Okay, that's good.
Now I got people complaining about working from home. Then go into the office, I don't care.
If people show up for the sign, they're just supposed to tell them to tell them what they want to show them.
Right, it's just discussion, they can come back with their discussion topics.
Quick question. The tablets?
Well, you know, that was
So you put it on like with a thumb drive or something, like an SD card or
Is it on the corner? Yeah.
like a little SD card that just slides right in.
It's on the, it's that across the street from the, yeah. Yeah, on the, yeah, on the, not there. It's the, yeah, opposite. Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
Because that used to have a restaurant there.
Not there. It's always been empty as far as I know. It's at least 30 years. There was a picture in here. Where was it?
About here.
So
At least I know why I know should here.
it's this corner here. I think.
That's where the restaurant used to be. Maybe about 50 years ago.
Sneeze, I do not have COVID-19, I'm sorry about that.
You're welcome.
But I did sneeze yesterday, so.
Never knew.
So,
Okay. Everybody ready? All right, let's sign this thing. Oh, I have to sign this one.
I think that was the call order. I didn't see it on the 6
Okay. Hi, good evening. It is, what's the date today?
16th.
16th. March 16th, 2020, 7 o'clock, and we'll start this meeting. Will we have a call to order, please?
Mr. Seaman, Ms. McCumber, Mr. Hasse,
Here.
Mr. Vest.
Did you say Mr. Bessie?
Yes.
Here.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Here.
Ms. Vigil, Mr. Kouskoudas, Mr. Morgan.
Here.
Thank you. Number 3 is, number 2 is approval of minutes for February 24th, which is a special date. May I have a approval, please?
Chairman, I'd like to motion that we accept the minutes as noted.
Thank you.
I second that motion.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion approval passes. Number 3 is the quasi-judicial announcement and swearing in of speakers.
This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Planning and Zoning Board acts in a quasi-judicial rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at this hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. Are there any members of the board wishing to disclose any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest this evening?
No.
Seeing none. Anyone wishing to speak this evening, if you could please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
So sworn.
Thank you. Moving on, we go to number 4, application number 18-128, site plan approval. Request for site plan approval to construct a medical and general office building at the northwest corner of Mears Boulevard and South Pinellas Avenue in the T5A South Pinellas Avenue Transect District.
Yes, and this is a request, as mentioned, to build a medical and general office building on this site with the attendant parking and drainage facilities. This is a 1.83 acre site that includes 1.2 acres of wetland for which the applicant has obtained necessary permits. And this is in the Community Redevelopment District, Future Land Use category. It's in the city's Special Area Plan, South Gateway Character District. And again, the wetland impacts have been permitted by the state, applicable state and federal agencies, and mitigation has been performed within the city limits. And the upland area is shown in the applicant's submittal to be urban area, filled area. With those two notes, we have found that the applicant's project is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and with the countywide plan requirements. This property is located within the T5A South Pinellas Ave Transect District in the special area plan, and that district allows office uses by right, and the site plan is consistent with the uses and requirements of the T5A Transect District. The project will not degrade levels of service for facilities. The staff report, page 3, lists the facilities impacts for this project. The TRC last reviewed this project on January 9th, 2020, and had no objections to the request. The minutes are attached, and all of the items have been addressed or are addressed with the conditions noted in the staff report. Staff finds that the application for site plan approval is consistent with the applicable review criteria, and staff is recommending approval of the site plan subject to the following conditions. The developer is responsible for meeting the minimum criteria of the Land Development Code and for acquiring all other jurisdictional permits and approvals. Construction plans shall be consistent with the approved site plan. All requisite fees attendant to the project shall be paid in accordance with the Land Development Code. Screening walls to hide parking are required on the east and south sides of the parking lot. The final building plan submittal shall show a screening wall on the south side, in addition to and matching the design of the screening wall noted on the site plan for the east side. The applicant shall submit a lighting plan for the property with the building permit application submittal to include light fixture product sheets showing cutoff fixtures for all outdoor lighting. On-site signs, sign poles, and lighting poles shall be designed to match City of Tarpon Springs specifications for the downtown and CRA districts. The applicant will be required to address Section 296 of the Land Development Code for public art at the time of building permit application submittal. The applicant will be required to submit with their building permit application plans and documents covering floodproofing and multi-tenant floodproofing management to the satisfaction of the Building Development Department, including recording of all attendant covenants on the property needed to ensure that these requirements are met. The applicant shall submit documentation of updated state and federal approval of the proposed dimensions and coverage of the wetland impact area and the status of the mitigation monitoring for those impacts. And finally, the site plan shall expire at 1 year from the effective date unless an application has been filed for a building permit with construction plans signed and sealed by a registered engineer licensed in the state of Florida. Are there any questions?
I have none. Anyone else have a question? May I ask if the applicant is here. If the applicant is here, would he like to address the board, please?
Okay. Should sit in copy. Good afternoon. My name is JD El Sabah. I'm with Sycamore Engineering, 8370 West Hillsborough Avenue, Suite 205, Tampa, Florida 33615. And I already sworn. I am the engineer for the project and the agent representing the owner for the property. So as Ms. McNeese indicated that we're proposing medical and general office to the property located in the northwest corner of US Alternate 19 and Maris Boulevard. The property is 1.83 acre, 1.2 acre is wetland, as you see. So if you kindly allow me, I'm going to go ahead and go through the history of the property, to go through so you see where we ended up now. So if you look into the package I presented, this is the submittal we did. This is the existing wetland, the second page. The third page is a site plan submitted to City of Tarpon Spring in 2010. And that site plan for retail center, 13,000 square foot, and get approved under ordinance 10-033 by the city. At that time, we, of course, and during, after we get approval, we went and pursue with the mitigation. And we did the mitigation to the site, of course, within the limit of the City of Tarpon Spring. We have three choices. We discussed it, of course, with the city: Dixie site, Dog Park, Rainsville site, and we choose, of course, none of these except the North Anclet River Park. The city have some grant, and we went and did it, and we pay for that, and would use it for the grant they have. So if you see with the pages later, the mitigation we create. This is a plan. We created mitigation plan to the wetland located in the North Anclet River Park. And this is, of course, this is during 2011. And we build it and submit that to SwiftMud and Army Corps and approve it by SwiftMud and Army Corps and the city. And since that time, it's in operation. So the mitigation completed to the wetland, which we did not impact. Of course, the economy, you know how it's happened in 2010. We never proceed with the construction for that site. 2018, there's some activity, if you recall, there's a possibility gas station there. They never proceed going into the B&Z, and they never submitted, never been reviewed by B&Z and City Council. So clearly we have here, and of course, until now, we are submitting for the site plan. We have a site approved by SwiftMud and Army Corps twice, and still all these permit is valid until now. And of course, the mitigation we propose, it's have been in operation since 2012. And here we are, we asking for your approval on the proposed medical and general office on the subject site.
Okay.
Any question?
Yes, I have a couple.
Sure.
So the site is pretty wet. I mean, the building that you're building, do you have to build that up? What are you doing about the wetland? What's happening with all that?
Well, it's the site. What's happened is the
It looks like it backs up to the canal back there?
Correct. What's happened, they dig the canal 50 years ago, and the canal surrounded by walls to the north side and the south side. The east side does not have any wall. And with the erosion, that what we created wet area. Get eroded with the time. The wetland in a poor quality. Florida requires 3 criteria for wetland, and this is one which is wet. It's a tidal influence. You got salt water go up and down with the time. So as far as wet, if you go now, you found out most of it, of course, not wet. But during different time of the season, yes, it is. So what we're trying to do, we clear the site, and we're gonna, of course, add fill and compact the fill. And up to certain elevation. As you know, we create even this elevation based on calculation, drainage calculation, to be sure, above the safety and for the whole site. Mm-hmm. So the site is in the flood elevation, the whole area in the flood, but this is tidal influence. So we still keep it at 7 elevation, which even the road is 4. So we are above the road as far as finished flow elevation. And we're gonna go with all the requirement for foundation flood protection also, which I think Ms. McNeese indicated that condition, one of the condition before we submit building plan.
When do you expect to start building?
Well, I think we say it before, and we were very excited 2010 to go forward and do it. But you know how it is, you know, the condition. We planning to do, you know, as much as soon as we can. I mean, what we need to do first to do the clearing before the rainy season on that after we get approval. And at some point, yes, we need to start preparing the building plan, submitting building plan, and proceed with the approval.
Okay, thank you.
And let me, for the record, if you don't mind, we, as you know, Ms. McNeese, we are not applying for any variance. All the rules apply on us for that, you know, CRD community area. So we are not asking for variance. We apply all the screening requirement, landscape requirement, the building requirement. All of it apply into it, and we're not asking for any waiver.
Do you have tenants already for this project?
Well, the best of my ability, there is some, but not the full area. So, you know, that's, but the market going in the right direction. And it's became, you know, this is the time we need to improve it. This is the corner of the city. And we need to, this is representation, I mean, the interest for the downtown. And at the same time, the Merce Boulevard is supposed to be completed next month. Mm-hmm. So all these factors, we're hoping, you know, it's that speculation and entrepreneurial part to involve to push the things to go forward.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. I noticed the elevation, finished floor elevation is specified at 7 feet.
Correct.
That is the accurate height that building will be finished at?
The finished floor will be 7 foot. The road is about 4.2, the sidewalk. And that's what we're gonna go, yes. What we're trying to do to create building with a friendly scale, which means somebody walking into the street does not see elevation of 10.
Right.
So that's the reason it costs more to put those protection for the flood more than, you know, to raise the elevation. Correct. But we try to create something, you know, close to be real, to scale, as architecturally or urban plan can say that.
Right, right. No, I see that. And you're going to accomplish that by adding in pilings in the soil?
Believe or not, you see, we have a couple of soil we did, and it's acceptable soil. There is no issue with the soil, absolutely. Okay. It's regular foundation.
Because I know there's a lot of areas that are in the swampy locations of town.
Right.
And they require driving in pilings and to sustain that building.
I mean, that's a good point. If you ask me this 2009, before I started working at ADU, yes. But after I work on it, we get, you know, geotechnical work also. This is acceptable soil, and with the fill we create, the settlement created for the foundation.
And it will be, well, once it's
Correct.
compacted, it'll
Correct.
aid in the shedding of water.
That's exactly correct.
Now, my one last question I do have for
Sure.
you. To the rear of that property, the road does flood. Will that aid or subtract from the whole scheme of your design?
My apology, the back of the property is what, I'm sorry?
It actually floods when it rains really hard.
Right.
And whenever there's whatever,
That parking lot fills up, too.
It fills
Right.
with water.
Well, what's happened is we're gonna raise it all, the whole property.
Okay, okay,
So there is no part none, part none.
okay.
And I guarantee you, this is with the tidal influence, rarely to find case like this.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, I've got, will you complete the wall for the canal in the back of your property?
Yes, we're gonna have a wall on the west side. Is that a question?
No, you said the canal is walled all the way around except the back of your property.
Right. So it's open. We're gonna fill the site, and we're gonna have retention pond, and we're gonna have a wall which created our retention pond. It's like the boundary for our retention pond. So that's bring up to the point you might be trying to bring. That we're gonna prevent erosion.
One last question.
Sure.
It might be a stupid one, but I'm just curious.
Please.
Why are you calling it the Shops of at Mears if it's going to be a medical building?
Well, it is really it's first of all, we're going to use the word Meris because Meris Boulevard, that's, it's the main place. And the second is it's really, we try to, it's not to make a difference, the plaza or the shops, but it started that name in the beginning, and we try to keep the same way as before. Therefore, we shop at Meris, which was retail and offices there. So we thought just keep the same concept and still give idea. Medical office, bring attention in shop, a place, or retail.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I have a question,
Sure.
and it has to do with the very beginning of your, it has to do with the very beginning of your presentation.
Certainly.
And actually, it doesn't have so much to do with the site plan.
Definitely.
But with how you achieve the mitigation.
No problem.
And when you started, you said refer to page 3 or 4.
Right.
We'll say. And I'll reference the 2010 site plan.
Correct.
And then the next page is, and I'll just read it, I'm trying to follow this and what the intent
Definitely.
was. Before looking into the NARP site for mitigation, alternative sites had been evaluated. What does NARP site mean? Is that the site we're referring to now?
That is correct. North Anklet River Park.
Thank you. Okay. And then you list Dixie Park, Dog Park, Rainsville site.
Correct.
You were speaking and I was attempting to keep up. Do I understand it that these were provided to you to evaluate as examples of how to provide water mitigation upon this site because of the unique characteristics?
I'm really glad to give me the chance to talk, on this. So what we have, we wanted to do the mitigation on site, within the city limit. So the staff is excessively helpful from when we worked 2010 until now. So really great thanks to everybody on this. So they passed to us. We have a site, this site, we can try to do something useful to the city at the same time. So we wanted to evaluate each one of them. Where we can create something useful, we can utilize it for mitigation. This site is good, however, we don't have enough credit to grant us we require 0.4 unit, what they call it unit as far as mitigation unit, and we don't have that. When we go to each one of them, it's 0.1, 0.15 for each one of these sites. So based on that, and with coordination with the city staff at that time, the best one is the North Anklet River because they are in need of it to do it very quickly. And that's what we choose, the North Anklet River, for that reason. So, but I'm telling you the truth, I don't know the condition right now for these. And if I have the chance, we tried when we did the Maris Town Center, the phase 3, we thought about it, but it's too tiny mitigation. It's very small mitigation comparing to what we doing 5-unit or 6-unit, whatever there. So it's still, I believe, available. I'm not sure where they are, but it is a good site. We think about it for any future work within the city for mitigation. So the bottom line, these are a small site. It could not have enough credit to create. However, North Anklet River was ready and they need the city to do and achieve the credit we need. Therefore, we choose it at that time. Am I clear myself right? Or
I think that you're clear and she's clear, but you would have to have a background in that process. I think I'm clear enough to know that this is beyond my skill level. Because as soon as you start mentioning credits, I think we're talking about mitigation banking.
correct?
Well, and if staff could be recognized, credit, when these agencies look at mitigation, they look at what you're going to either restore, and I have a little bit of background in it, that gets higher credit. Create, that gets not as high of credit. Preserve, that gets even less. Or a bank, pay into a bank, that's a fourth option. So what I think JD's trying to explain is some of these other sites, and they value the credit by what kind of wetlands are you creating as opposed to what you're impacting. What's the, what is the mitigation? When will it serve the nature, for lack of a better point? They actually calculate at what point they think the plant cover and the condition and all that will. So all that goes into a calculation by the agency, and they come up with a credit. And I think what JD's trying to explain is some of these other sites didn't come up to that number, whereas the Anklet site did.
And how does that affect this site plan and this property? What I guess I'm missing the link to that, or was that just a conversational example?
That's conversation, and this is the history of the property. We already compensate for the impact to the wetland. We already compensate that. This is for the site plan at that time for 13,000 square foot. And we are here, we try to get updated site plan for that. So what I'm trying, the bottom line is, we already mitigate for that wetland we're going to impact now. We mitigate into it 8 years ago.
Like those apartments.
Yeah, so they never completed the impact. They only
Never.
completed the
Now I
mitigation.
understand.
Excellent.
Thank you for your patience.
But Ms. McNeese brought up an excellent point. There's two choices mostly in when you impact wetland. Either pay for bank or create wetland similar to it. So we choose the other side, which create wetland. It's easy way to pay for the bank. Pay mitigation done. However, we choose the difficult one, which was because they require quarterly maintenance and operation, and we have been in this since 2012.
I know exactly about quarterly operation and inspections.
Here we go.
In part of an HOA, so I'm in tune with that mitigation areas. Okay.
Excellent.
Well, thank you again for helping me come up to speed with that. I know it didn't have a lot to do with the site plan, but it's where that started. It's how that work you did in 2010 is what provided the basis for you to be able to build the structure now.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Absolutely. And that's what we try to go to the history, because many people ask, well, why are you impacting the wetland now? I'll be frank with you. So I'm trying to say, we already mitigate for that wetland. And for poor condition wetland, we already mitigate for it, or mitigate it 8 years ago. So, and of course approved by Army Corps and SWIFMOD. And we still, of course, active permit on both sides.
Thanks again. No more questions from me.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then we will close the general, or is there anyone else here in the general public wish to come up and speak? No? Okay, well then we will close this part and move just to the board. Does anybody here in the board have any discussion about this? No? Then we need to vote on if we pass this or not. Do I hear a motion?
Chairman, I motion in regards to application 18-128 for site plan approval that we approve as submitted.
Thank you.
I second that motion.
Thank you. We have a vote, please. All
Mr. Morgan?
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Hasse?
yes. Okay, thank you. Next on our list is application number 19-168, site plan approval. Request for site plan approval to construct a medical office, dental clinic, building at the northeast corner of South Huey Avenue and East Lime Street in the Highway Business HB District.
Yes, and this is, as mentioned, an application to build a dental clinic. This will be basically an extension of the medical clinic that's there on the St. Timothy property right next door. The community health centers of Pinellas are kind of expanding their resources in Tarpon Springs with this addition. This is, again, a 5,000 square foot dental clinic. The property is owned by City of Tarpon Springs, and this applicant has a long-term lease arrangement to allow the building of the clinic. And this is in the commercial general future land use category, which accommodates commercial and office uses, and this project is consistent with the comprehensive plan. It's in the Highway Business Zoning District, and again, these uses are allowed by right, and this use meets all of the requirements of the zoning district. The project is not expected to degrade levels of service, and the facility's impacts are listed on page 3 of the staff report. The TRC reviewed this application at their February 6, 2020 meeting. The minutes are included, and the items have been addressed or are in the conditions. So staff finds the application for site plan approval consistent with the applicable review criteria, and staff recommendation is to approve the site plan subject to the following. The developer is responsible for meeting the minimum criteria of the Land Development Code and for acquiring all other jurisdictional permits and approvals. Construction plans shall be consistent with the approved site plan. All requisite fees attendant to the project shall be paid in accordance with the Land Development Code. The estimated gallons per day of water and sewer demand shall be provided with the submittal for a building permit. Submittal of final drainage plans and calculations for approval by the city is required prior to application for a building permit. Plans submitted for a building permit application shall be revised to reconfigure and straighten the proposed water line on Lime Street and to remove the proposed jogs in the line. On-site signs, sign poles, and lighting poles shall be designed to match City of Tarpon Springs specifications for the downtown NCRA area. And this site plan shall expire at 1 year from the effective date unless an application has been filed for a building permit with construction plans signed and sealed by a registered engineer licensed in the state of Florida. Are there any questions?
No, it's pretty simple. Thank you. Is there anyone here that would like to speak about this project? Please state your name and address, please.
My name is Arthur Pollard of Spring Engineering. Address is 7821 Red Run Drive, Port Richey, Florida. It's actually a good time to be building medical facilities. Let's see, actually, I guess, in its simplest terms, the people that need medical care need dental care, so there's just a need to expand the services already provided, and so that's exactly what they're looking to do. Along the way, there was some small local flooding on Lime Street that we were asked to take care of, which, to be honest, I think that's a great idea. We had extra capacity in the pond, and so I know from the big picture, it'll handle it. Now there's just some little nuts and bolts details about exactly what size, what pipes need to be, and proving that they don't impact things upstream and downstream. Fine tuning the details to be worked out. But I already know the pond's large enough that the water that flows in historically is greater than the water that flows out post-development. So it's just details. So I'm just here to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Is this part of the, I want to say Section 8 or social services type building that's in that next to it?
Similar function, I don't know how it's structured.
So it's more of a private
from an
dental clinic then?
administrative thing.
Yeah.
Not sure either. I know it's a there's a level of community service there, but I don't know the arrangement, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The actual property, believe it has a lift station there.
It does, and that will remain there, and we've been working with them. They asked that the fence be expanded. There's a gravel area, I guess, where they park or do something right next to it, so that fence will be expanded to include that. And the driveway on the other side actually improves their access to it. You no longer have to pull off the road to park next to it. You can just pull into the parking lot and park near it to service it.
When you mentioned them, you mentioned that, who is them?
Oh, sorry, the utility department,
Of Tarpon
of Tarpon Springs.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
I have a question.
Sure.
And first, thank you as a resident of Tarpon Springs that you're able to take a little bit of our stormwater and park it somewhere. That is nice. And that's a very nice opening, too. Here's the gift. Hey, I have a question about the site plan and the process in general. And it's just kind of tied to the orientation of the building and how that came about. So as someone that is concerned about reduce, reuse, and recycle, it always strikes me the orientation of buildings, and we'll use this one as an example, which is an all-hip roof, and it's got these beautiful wide expanses of roof space that would be lovely homes for PV. And someone that doesn't have the luxury of building these but just gets to review them, I always wonder where, if ever, during the process of design, that one thinks, hey, if we orient the building in a certain way, even if we don't put PV on it now, at a later date, it's a great home for PV. This building has the roof shape that would accept it, but it's not necessarily oriented right. So was there any opportunity, certainly it's too late for this one now, but how does that enter the discussion? Did it ever? Because this building is new and it's going to be public, but yet there's not any accommodation made at this point. Granted, this is only site plan, for taking advantage of solar as one example of reduce, reuse, recycle. So with that, just can you comment in regards to the design process and if PV is ever discussed, and why couldn't that building be rotated so it could put a great big 6 kW array on it at now or later in the future?
Right.
Thank you.
This particular building has very strict site constraints. There's very deep, I believe it's clay, but it might be a different material, sewer pipe that has a wide easement around it so that you can access the deep sewer pipe that runs in the front of it, and the entire front half of the property is a 100-foot wide easement in which you can't put a building because the overhead power lines. And then there's that diagonal storm pipe that runs across the back part, so that kind of wedged you into that little triangular area. So the orientation of the building in this particular case was dictated as much by the site conditions as anything else. And because it's an auxiliary of the existing function, in other words, people going to the medical are also going to need dental, so they wanted them to have easy access from one to the other. Having them aligned and close together made the most sense for that. To answer your question in general, yes, it actually is something that is looked at because frankly, depending on your use, there's money on the table for pursuing that. There's lead credits for people that are interested in being lead silver, lead certified, lead gold. So those are things that are looked at. It just wasn't feasible in this particular case.
That's a pretty darn good answer. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions from the board? No. Thank you. Are there any other applicants or anyone in the audience that would like to talk, comment? No? Okay, thank you. Then we will close the public speaking and ask amongst the board. So, board, do we have any comments, questions? None?
My only question was that lift station and how it could buffer out the aesthetics of the building.
Right.
That was my only thing.
That's a lift station. I don't know what
It's a
they're going to
lift
do with it, you know? All right, then. We need to approve or not. So do I have any motion?
I'll make a motion to approve this application 19-168.
Thank you.
I second it.
Oh, we have a second? Thank you. Take a roll call, please.
Mr. Morgan?
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Hasse?
Yes. Thank you. Moving on. Next is discussion items. And what does discussion items mean?
This is a discussion of the sign code draft that came before you the last time. It came before you as a public hearing, and then it went to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners deferred the item to have it come back to you for discussion because there were some concerns and also a general concern that you all hadn't had adequate time to review the draft. So this is coming back to you for discussion, and we have Louis Cerna here, our consultant, and we have the city attorney here to address some of the things that came up. So if you'll give me one more second. And one thing I should interject, as you all know, the city is right now in mode for taking precautions and protocol for COVID-19. So that's why I'm wiping this down in preparation for them. And we do have hand sanitizer here. I didn't mention it, but if any of you would like some of that, it's fine. So with that, I'll bring up this item.
And keep in mind, too, this is just a discussion item, so there won't be any voting on the amendments to the ordinance this evening. It's just a time to discuss, ask questions, get more information, since at the last meeting there was a lot of hesitation on being able to make a motion to either to approve it as it was or even approve with conditions because there just wasn't enough information.
Good evening, Planning and Zoning Board members. Louis Cerna with Calvin Giordano and Associates presenting staff comments. As we indicated last time, there's some legal concerns with the existing sign code, primarily dealing with sign content in regard to a past decision of the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's primarily the reason for the updates. The attorney who prepared this, Rob Eschenfelder, is here today. He can explain the content issues better than I can. So we're going to sort of do a tag team on this. I know there were some comments last time, generally throughout the ordinance. So I guess at this point we can just take your comments. I can allow Rob to do an introduction of the content questions. But like I said, it's a little of both. There were two board workshops on this item. So the items in blue in your draft are changes that came as a result of the board workshop. So the board has seen this on two separate occasions as well. They did have input. So between the two of us, we'd be glad to answer your questions on this.
So I have a couple to start with.
Sure.
So where is the controversy? Where are the ticking points of why we're still discussing this?
Yeah, and that's probably what the attorney, I guess, can answer as far as being out of compliance. You mean with the Supreme Court decision, or what are
Well, that and, I wasn't here at the last one.
Oh, okay.
So I think that,
apologize.
yeah, the issues last time were what changes are being made to the sign code that are specific to the Supreme Court ruling and case law that has come down that are required by the city in order to come in compliance. And then some of the issues were what changes are being made based upon some of the Board of Commissioners workshops and how those changes that are not otherwise required, like I think one of the things were the sandwich boards with chalkboard writing, how those were going to impact members that have local businesses. I know there was some talk about the Chamber of Commerce not being involved, things like that, and how local businesses would be impacted by some of these signs and permitting for some of these signs, that type of thing. So I think those were the major sticking points at the last meeting. And if anyone remembers anything else, please chime in.
So have the Chamber of Commerce and small businesses been involved in any of these talks?
I believe so.
Yeah, they've been notified, and they haven't had a lot of comments. I think they were concerned with the bus bench signs, and I can go through that change, and the chalkboard A-frame signs. I think this board really had primarily their concern was they didn't have enough time to review it. So real quickly, I can talk about those two issues.
Yes, please.
The bus bench signs, let me see.
While you're looking, if I may, since it's a discussion.
Sure.
The luck of the draw is, who was present at the last vote meeting?
The people that had the ticking points that they were saying we needed more time, they are not present here this evening.
And I unfortunately was not, and you were not, and you were not. So our lone...
It's a different complement of the board, almost entirely.
Right, so for the discussion to come back, no one, yeah, terrific. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've had a chance to go through this. I'll hit the highlights, I guess, of what's being changed.
Thank you.
Again, the purpose of this is to address the content issues. The Supreme Court rule that signs cannot be regulated based on content. So most of these changes you see in there are because of that. There are a number of other changes that were made because as you go through this, and the board mentioned that they'd like to see some things changed. Just to go through my highlights, window and door signs, we added a definition of window and door signs permanent. These signs have been revised to regulate all window and door signs as permanent signage and to establish a maximum signs for non-residential window and door signage as a percentage of the total surface area. This is based on staff finding that these weren't being regulated in the current code. So we just added a section on that on page 42. The pole banner signs, section number 3, that appears on page 42. This just allows allows a section to allow banner displays on light poles that are located on, not located within public rights-of-way. So I think the Advent Health facility, they have banners located on their light poles. This really just adds a section of code that allows that. It formalizes that to allow those to be done. Fourth item, probably one of the controversial items on page 43, bus bench and bus shelter advertising sign. The way it's been proposed, as directed by the board, is to prohibit those in the city. And there's also been amortization, which would allow removal of the signs. They could stay in place until January 1st of 2026. So provisions have been added to allow for the ultimate removal of those. So as far as comments go, that was one item that there was concern about.
Can I ask you why?
That was really just a direction of the board that they don't feel they're visually attractive. I think that's the sense that I got. They just don't like the appearance of those.
But I don't think the city provides those. I think the people pay for them to put them there or something.
Yeah, and this would just require that they be removed by 2026, so really just prohibiting them.
And did the city
essentially
have any provision to put a bench in owned by the city?
No, I mean, these are all put on by private citizens, and they do provide signage. They're more of a sign than a bench in most cases, I think, and that's part of the concern.
Okay.
Now, where it says prohibited signs in all districts, page, 40, the bottom of 42, but all of 43. And on, it states, where is it? Vehicle signs. That this, whatever new law is going to prohibit vehicle signs, like magnetic signs?
No, I don't think that's the intent. Let me see. Yeah, these are signs that are used exclusively for purposes of displaying a sign. And, looks like Rob wants to add to that.
You have to look at the definition in the definition sections. Mine is on page 32 of what a vehicle sign is. A vehicle sign means a sign which covers more than 10 square feet of the vehicle, which identifies a business product or services and which is attached to, mounted, pasted, painted, or drawn on a motorized or drawn vehicle and is parked and visible from the public right-of-way unless that vehicle is used for transporting people or materials in the normal day-to-day operation of the business. What this regulation gets to, and really when you read the definition, you hopefully will visualize, is that some businesses will take an old car that probably doesn't even run anymore, and they will plaster a sign on it and stick it out front to get another piece of signage, and so that's what this is trying to get at. It's not getting at people who have a maid business or the termite guy, that drive from house to house and treat people. That's not what this is about. This is about stationary, putting the vehicle in front of your business and primarily using it as a sign.
Oh, so I take it like a vehicle wrap would fall into that category.
If it's parked in front of a business and it covers more than 10%, yes.
Oh, I see. So it's a non-used vehicle. So
Right.
It's a parked.
Right, and is parked and visible from the public right-of-way.
Gotcha.
So it's people who are putting these vehicles out there
For advertisement.
to get a sign,
Gotcha.
basically. It's not really
Gotcha. Okay.
normal transportation.
Thank you.
Sure.
That is a really good question, because that is a common workaround for a business that doesn't have allowable sign. It's how they're getting signage
Sure.
when they're not allowed signage.
Correct.
It works,
Yes.
and this specifically addresses that.
Yeah. I know quite a few people that use those.
How about the
cars.
plumber guy that parks that truck at intersections every now and then?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it, but he does it here in Tarpon. Just puts his abandoned truck and just leaves it on the side of the road until someone comes along and tells him to move it.
Yeah.
Just a couple other points. The wall signs, Staff recommended that doing away with the limitation of one wall sign, so this just allows more flexibility. The maximum sign area, wall sign area stays the same. It just eliminates the word one, and that's on page 57. And then finally, the A-frame sandwich board signs, the other controversial issue, I guess the one that we've received comments on, is on page 64. And this was based on board direction. It just adds some limitations on, it adds some design standards on these, primarily that they be composed of chalkboard material. I know there's been some pushback on that. And again, we're just looking for directions, so when you get to that point that we can take to the board that Planning and Zoning Board does or does not like that portion of it. And as it's written now, that would apply citywide. I think at the last P&Z, the comment, there really wasn't consensus, was that perhaps it should only apply in the historic district if you're going to require chalkboard signs. So there's some ability to make those recommendations as well. So at this point, we're really just taking discussion. But that's an issue, for example, that's not a content-related issue. That was just a new standard that the board recommended be put in this new ordinance.
So I have a couple questions. So I see there's also in there abandoned signs. And what happens after 60 days? I mean, I've seen signs stand here for years that have never moved. And so, okay, after 60 days, what happens? Who removes it?
The city would have under this ordinance, but already has under its current code, the opportunity and authority to remove it. It's a matter of if the city elects to remove it. You know, I'm not certain how proactive the city staff is driving around looking for abandoned signs, so it may be where somebody has to call them and say, look, you know, this sign appears to be, you know, well abandoned. Like, you know, I come up Gulf to Bay from the Bayside Bridge many days, and you know, and this of course is in Clearwater, but I drive past a business that long has been closed, yet sits out front that sign, and so Clearwater certainly also has a abandoned sign provision.
Well, it's funny, we have rules, but we don't stick to the rules, so to speak. So that's kind of been one of my pet peeves in the past, that there's a lot of rules, but it's not that big of a rule, so why even have it then?
Well, and that's a political discussion. Of course, you know, it's not something that we're going to be able to solve tonight, but you know, certainly our elected officials face dueling pressures, you know. I mean, you've got one side of the community saying, get out there and enforce. Why can't we have 10 times more code enforcement officers? And then you have other folks saying, you know, laissez-faire, leave us alone, let us be private sector. And, you know, and then you have the business community saying, you know, we have to make money. And so you know, when individual day-to-day operations occur, our elected officials and our city's management have to just make decisions about what they're going to make a deal of and what they're not going to make a deal of. But as Mr. Cerna, you know, alluded to, you know, part of why we started this process in 2018 is because the United States Supreme Court has ruled in Reed v. Town v. Gilbert that local governments can't regulate signs based upon the content of the sign. And so anybody that's familiar with sign codes understands that for decades before that decision, sign codes were written to call out content. A garage sale sign, a construction sign, a real estate sign, you know, all of those things are, you have to read the sign to see what it is, and the Supreme Court sort of really upended all that in the Reed case and said, you can't do that. If you have a regulation that requires the enforcement officer to read the sign in order to see if it's compliant or not, that's a violation of the First Amendment. And the court explained that you can do, you know, governments can do lots of other stuff. They could decide how big a sign is, how tall a sign is, whether it's lighted or not, how many of them you can have, you know, all of those sort of things, but you can't regulate based upon the content. And so, you know, the process has sort of gone on longer than I anticipated, the process would. But I just, from our perspective as your attorneys, we want to, impress upon you that we do need to move forward, past this process and move it back to the commission. Because, as of right now, if we did attempt to enforce the sign code, that we are open to a constitutional attack because, we haven't, done these fixes. So it is something that we do want to keep moving along. It's unfortunate that, most of you weren't here the last time, when your colleagues expressed concerns. But be that as it may, I believe we're coming before you again for an actual public hearing where you will, vote on whatever recommendations you want. And so hopefully, and a part of the problem, I think, too, is that commissioners heard a few folks from the business community, express concern. And it always is the case that you could put this out there a year ago and the business community will only start paying attention when it, is about to be adopted. And then everyone says, well, we've never, you surprised us and everything. So I think the commissioners wanted to provide tonight as an opportunity for that business community to come forward. It's unfortunate, no one has. But at least as the Planning Commission, you guys have this in front of you. Your colleagues who aren't here tonight, who were here last time, have it in front of them. When we come back to you next time, hopefully everybody will be ready to, talk about it and make whatever recommendations you want to, have go to the commission so that we can bring them forward.
So that will come back to us again?
Right, so that you can have a public hearing on it and recommend either approval with conditions or denial.
I think it's scheduled for April, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
For now.
We're here, so if you have questions tonight, please feel free to.
So there's a lot of questions in here about sandwich boards, and I think at one, I've heard that they were not really allowed here before, is that correct? And now they are, or is?
Well, the code was sort of silent on them, and so because they are a thing now that businesses use, I've, on behalf of our firm, I've done the sign code work for most of the rest of our clients. And so in working with the city staff, felt that it was important because it is a phenomenon to go ahead and put the detail in there and address it. And most of that new language isn't all that controversial, bringing it in at night, that sort of stuff, make sure it looks neat. But I think the controversial thing is really should it be chalkboard, should it not be chalkboard? The commissioners have discussed it, as Mr. Cerna indicated, in a workshop, and they're of multiple minds. Some of them sort of like Dunedin, for instance. One of our clients went with the chalkboard model because it looks artistic, and it's kind of what really the sidewalk sign originally started as is here's my daily specials and let me draw flowers on it. But a lot of businesses came and made the point that both in our other jurisdictions and here of, look, we aren't artists, we're a pizza shop and we don't do all that stuff. We just want to plaster, $5.99 for a pizza and put it out there, on the sidewalk. Please let us do our thing. And so ultimately, whatever recommendation you all make as to that particular question, if you choose to make a recommendation, the commissioners are going to have the last call of what those signs are going to look like. And with a lot of these little things, I will tell you, and certainly bless you, tell the commission that what our goal is not to let perfection be the enemy of the good. Almost all of this is not controversial, and as I've described, legally we need to move forward. There's always an opportunity if it gets adopted on one side or the other side of one of these controversial issues, and 6 months in or whatever, experience teaches we need to come in and tweak it. You can just easily come in and do a follow-up ordinance to just tweak that section. So we want to hold the whole thing up just because people are not sure if they want chalkboards or not. So.
Okay, thank you.
And I think one of the things on the sandwich board, chalkboard signs, the comments that were made are this applies in all zoning districts that are commercially zoned. And the comment was made, if there's a business on US 19, their chalkboard sign isn't doing them any good if it's made with chalkboard. And specific to the ordinance, it says that it's with a posted speed limit of 40 miles an hour or less. So it's very tailored to individual areas that are going to have these types of signs.
Correct.
In a specific aesthetic. So kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about your recommendations.
Well, I'm definitely reading this.
And that would be basically geared for pedestrian traffic more so than vehicular traffic.
I believe that was the intent.
That's really should be the focus of these signs, and not something that's along Highway 19.
A general question, how did it go from the Supreme Court ruling of content to detailing and, I guess, getting rid of every sign that someone doesn't care for? How did that happen?
Not sure what you're...
Why isn't the sign ordinance just about content and just applying, I guess to get to the point of you need to move beyond this, why didn't it just focus on being compliant with the Supreme Court ruling and leave it at that?
Oh, well, because so anytime we look at opening up an ordinance, we work with the client, in this case, our planning folks, and talk about the scope of the amendment. And we talk about things like, well, this chapter of the code hasn't been touched in a very long time. It uses terms that are antiquated. Its organization isn't all that good, and so why would you go in and open up a chapter and fix one thing and then leave a bunch of other stuff that really needs to be fixed? And so that's why, in working with the city's management, we went ahead and since we were fixing the content-based stuff, we also picked up a lot of these other things because things change. For instance, electronic signs and so forth. The language that is used currently versus the language that really reflects what's now used by the industry. Those things all need to be freshened up, and I think that's why it looks more extensive than just dealing with the content issue.
Okay, so that answers that first question, and you nicely dovetailed right into the discussion portion, and that is, I want to just make sure I read it right. And that is page 42, prohibited signs, all districts. So as I understand that, that means any sign within the city of Tarpon Springs proper.
That's correct.
From Klosterman to top of Anclote Road or whatever. Okay,
Yes.
good. And then I guess I just struggle with how bench and bus shelter advertising signs suddenly became worth removing completely from our city. This is just open discussion. And then you mentioned electronic signs. Well, lots of signs are electronic and they're all programmable. So as I understand that, that means that any sign within the city of Tarpon Springs that happens to have electronic functioning is now prohibited?
Oh, well, no. So you, first of all, you have to read the code as a total. And there is a grandfathering provision in there that if you currently have a lawful sign, whether it's electronic sign or any other kind of sign, and this code would make it unlawful, you're grandfathered in. So
forever?
Well, no. That you have to read the grandfathering provision, and the grandfathering provision says that you can do regular maintenance to the sign. What you can't do, it's on page 48, and this is in the current code. Non-conforming signs, which is what it becomes, a grandfathered non-conforming sign, except as otherwise provided for in this article, may be continued in operation, provided that no non-conforming sign shall be changed or replaced with any other non-conforming sign, so you can't take it out and put something else in, structurally altered so as to extend their useful life, except that normal maintenance may be permitted, expand it in any manner, increase it in height, relocate it, or modify it in any way that would increase the degree of nonconformity. And so when you look at the case law about grandfathered nonconforming uses, because not just for signs but other things, types of structure, the courts say that this is the proper way for local governments to eventually get the policy that they want to get to while still preserving the property interests of the folks that had lawful property at the time you adopted the ordinance.
Okay, I get that, and please forgive me if I cut you off, because I think we're going down the wrong road. I understand that part. Thank you. I'm still at a loss, and I guess this is why the other board... Who suggested to the Board of Commissioners, or were it them themselves, that did someone that really disliked signs decided that they wanted to take us back 100 years in signage and say that bench and bus shelter signs and all electronic changeable signs from this date forward, this says 60 days, no more electronic signs in the entire city? I guess I'm just at a loss for words. Am I misunderstanding something?
Well, again, I think that if you have a lawful current sign within the city, that lawful current sign is going to be a grandfathered non-conforming use. So it is incorrect if you to go and tell any business, ooh, if this ordinance gets adopted, you must rip out your sign. That is
I didn't
not-
suggest that, and I understand that part. Let's use the future. So about 3 blocks away from here, a little brewery's opening up. And if they put a little sign in their window that changes and it says open, closed, and it's electronic, and maybe it flips over and says on Wednesdays you get a free hot dog, I understand that that sign's illegal.
Well, if they attempt to install a prohibited sign after the ordinance comes into effect, then it's a prohibited sign, and they're not allowed to install it. And so,
Doesn't make sense. It's kind of infringing on your,
So I'm going to go back in time just for the spirit of why I might be asking is, so years ago, I was part of the Code Enforcement Board, and at one point, and I was there for quite some time, we had this wonderful code enforcement officer who, for whatever reason, decided that signage was how she was going to write citations. Now, she would overlook abandoned lots filled with garbage and abandoned cars, but man, she would excoriate people that put up signs for car washing or whatever it was. And that was just, we'd have 5 signed things at a meeting, right, wrong, or otherwise. So we'd get into these rabbit holes on signs. And you know what? These people get hit pretty hard, right? He'd put up a cigarette sign in his store, and she'd be on them like white on rice right over there. You've got a cigarette sign in your window, and that's against the code of ordinances. And the guy would come in, he's like, man, I'm just trying to sell some cigarettes in my mini mart. It's just conversation, right? This is just discussion. I can see how they ended up here, is that, wow. Wow, it took a meat cleaver to something that needed a little fingernail clipper.
who actually came up with this nomenclature? Like all this wording and decisions? Like what's good, what's not? Or what's permissible?
The process begins with our office going back and forth with the professional planning staff here as the early drafts, and the process began in 2018. As the drafts occurred, planning would provide feedback of, we, city staff, feel, this should be this or that should be that, and it gets revised and tweaked to the point where staff felt it appropriate, that it was in good enough shape to then bring to the commissioners. We then had, as Mr. Cerna indicated, 2 workshops with the commissioners. They overall seem relatively pleased with the product. I understand you can characterize it depending on whether you like the policy or not as a meat cleaver or whatnot, but I think with several focused debates that they're having amongst themselves, such as A-frame signs being chalk or not, and there were a few other, like one was whether pole signs should have a certain architectural look or not, but none of them expressed any concern about being more clear about what signs are prohibited. And so certainly, if the Planning Commission feels that list should be re-examined, that's part of your function. And so, you all make a motion and make your recommendations to the Commission, and those will be brought forward.
The whole thing just seems to me anti-business. I mean, we're trying to attract people to Tarpon Springs, and it seems like it's going to have just the opposite effect.
Well, I do know that the city manager, I'm not sure if Ms. McNabb was part of it as well, but I know the city manager, at the instruction of the commission, has gone out numerous times to engage the business community, with the Chamber of Commerce and so forth, and there have been a few individual businesses who have made comments, mostly about the A-frame sign part of the code, but I have not been made aware of any significant outpouring of the chamber that on a broad basis the chamber feels that this is anti-business. And I will also say to you that if you look around both Pinellas County and neighboring counties here in Florida, that these aren't uncommon provisions. I mean, every local elected body, be it a county commission or a city commission, has to make policy decisions that balance being pro-business with also community aesthetics and what residents want to see and what tourists want to see in terms of beauty of the area and so forth, and create a balance. And that's not a lawyer's job, that's not staff's job. We draft stuff up and answer commissioners' questions. At the end of the day, they make these policy decisions, and they can adjust this list as they desire. But after 2 workshops, none of them have shown any concern about the list, and most of them have been pretty positive on most of where the ordinance is.
Now, and for y'all's purposes, obviously 3 of the 4 of you have not had the benefit of having looked at this, although you were provided, I understand, Mr. Vesey, maybe you were not, but the rest of you had been provided the packet, so you had the ordinance, and you knew it was being brought before today. The intention was that you would look through it, and then the things that you did have problems with, like the things that we're discussing, when we have the public hearing on it, that's something that if the board as a whole decides that's something that you want to recommend be changed to the Board of Commissioners, you can certainly do so, but keep in mind that the body as a whole has to recommend that change. So, if at the next hearing, it's, we like everything, but we think that electronic signs should not be banned, and sandwich board A-frame signs should be able to be whatever material, not chalk. And the whole board decides that, that motion
Vote
is
on
first,
it.
it's, there's a motion made, a seconded, and it passes, then that's the recommendation that will be made to the Board of Commissioners. And just like everything else that this board does, once it gets to the Board of Commissioners, they'll take that into account, but ultimately they're going to decide how they're going to decide based on, what they do at that level, so.
Okay.
But as you well know, they take your recommendations into consideration when they do make their ultimate recommendations. So before the next meeting, I would strongly suggest taking a look at the entire ordinance. It's quite lengthy, and that's, like Mr. Eschenfelder said, there's a reason for that, because it was not just what the city needed to do to comply with the terms of the Supreme Court ruling, but also it's a good time to take advantage and look at the code as a whole to see what other changes would want to be made from a future planning perspective.
Is there a timeline on when we've got to comply with the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, how it works is when the Supreme Court rules, you must comply. So the Reed case is now years old. We've worked with our other clients to get them into compliance. It's just taken longer here in Tarpon for a variety of reasons. But I guess that what we would say to you as your legal counsel is, we are concerned that the ordinance as it's currently written would have substantial weaknesses if it were challenged in federal court right now, in terms of us being able to defend it. What that translates into is that every week that goes by, if something comes up in the city where the city does want to, take some enforcement action or whatever, it will have to think twice about doing that because of the potential that the person who gets cited will go get a First Amendment lawyer who will just say, well, y'all didn't take care of your ordinance yet, it's unconstitutional, and the court strikes it down, and then we'll be left with nothing, and so we're really trying to be proactive here. And I started my career, I tell a story because it's good for illustration purposes. I started my career with the city of St. Petersburg, and the city of St. Petersburg had a adult use ordinance. And we lawyers told the city council, the federal courts are saying that you can go this far, but don't go any further because you might run afoul of the First Amendment. But the elected officials back then in the 90s decided we want to be even stronger, and so they instructed that it be stronger. The federal court promptly struck it down, and it created like a 5-6 month window where the city had no adult use ordinance. And all the adult uses flooded in because there was no ordinance in place. So we're trying to go ahead and accomplish the fix before a lawsuit comes, so that we can get it done. So is there like a due date by? No, the Supreme Court has thus ruled. Everybody needs to follow that ruling, and that's what we're trying to do.
And that happened in 2015.
No.
So this is more of on a national level then?
Everybody around the country
everyone in the
is doing
whole
this.
United States has to comply?
Yes, sir.
So let me ask you this. What happens to places like Manhattan and New York City? All those lights, they all have to close them all down?
Well, a light may or may not be a sign.
I'm just trying to understand this concept.
Right. Well, a light may or may not be a sign. And again, if a local government like downtown Manhattan, has a certain look and feel and vibe. And so if the New York City Commission, I guess that's what it's called, decides as a policy matter that for this district, because it's chock full of tourists and this is how we look,
Correct.
we're cool with all of that, then that's fine. I mean, Reed didn't say get rid of electronic signs. Reed just said, if you're going to be regulating signs, don't do it based on content. And so the electronic sign stuff that your colleague is complaining about, that's just something that is added to, it's a policy choice to be made. Many of our other clients have done that. If Tarpon Springs chooses for policy reasons not to, because it wants businesses to use electronic changeable copy signs, that's great, that's fine. You know, I think a lot of governments regulate those or prohibit those because when put along roadsides, especially at night, they can be distracting to drivers, and so there's a safety thing. And if they're next to neighborhoods, you got the flashing signs and people trying to sleep. And so again, it's that balance that you know our commissioners have to deal with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, that's something that you guys can recommend changing, either maybe not a wholesale ban, maybe, you know, only in certain zoning districts. But if you're going to come back with those recommendations, I would just be clear that, you know, what zoning districts that you want to see those in, what zoning districts you don't, you want to see them everywhere, what types, because when you make your recommendations to the Board of Commissioners, the more detailed that you can be, the better it will be for them to be able to make the decision, and not have to sit at the dais and wholesale rewrite the section of code that they've already been working on for several years.
So the sponge docks could have different rules than the rest of Tarpon.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd like to add as well, the city will probably, it's probably a good idea to recommend that once this legal issue gets looked at, that the city set up a committee and do a close, you know, do a real close rewrite of the sign code, because there are a lot of moving parts to it, and there's usually a lot of public input that's needed. So, as Rob indicated, just because the commission passes this, ultimately doesn't mean they cannot immediately turn around and start working on updates based on what everybody wants to see. But we do want to get it past to the point of making changes back and forth to address these outstanding legal issues.
So it usually happens that when you finally pass the law, everybody goes, oh no, now we have to say something. So yeah.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, a lot of the stuff that's in this code is already in the existing code. It may show as underlined, but it's probably stricken. It may be stricken in another section of this ordinance. So yeah, it's just been moved. So keep that in mind too. A lot of what's in here is in the existing code.
Thank you.
And to follow up on that, you know, certainly y'all don't get appointed to a position like this unless you're very involved in the community. We've tried a great deal to get the business community to come in and engage with y'all. I mean, that's what tonight is all about. That's why we're all here. If y'all know business people, you know, make sure that they know about it, make sure they understand it, because, you know, certainly I know that the city manager and the mayor and commissioners want to have open, full engagement. You know, it's not like anybody's trying to slip this through. It's just, we've got to get it done. It's been rolling for almost 2 years now, and you know, just as we get closer, people are starting to pop up and say, well, wait a minute. And so we're taking a breather. That's part of what we did tonight. But we do need to move forward. So if y'all know folks in the community that might have questions or concern, you know, make them aware. Invite them to whenever we get back together in April, so that they can feed you their thoughts and feelings, and you can translate that into some votes.
Good advice. Thank you. Any other questions from the board? No? Okay, then anyone from the public like to speak?
Well, this is a discussion item.
Discussion, okay.
And
Never mind.
I would say too, that in the meantime, between this meeting and next meeting, if y'all have any questions or something comes up that you're reading it, you're not quite understanding, please reach out to us. You can reach out to me. I can forward it to Rob or to Pat, whomever needs it, or to Louie or to whomever. That way we can get your questions answered before the next meeting,
right.
So you have a foundation to work from, and we can make it pretty efficient and effective. And maybe, Pat, you can send out something, or Kim can send out something to the whole board and said, hey, we had a discussion. Please go back and watch the YouTube video for those who weren't present. And then if y'all want to watch the YouTube video from the previous meeting, that way you're kind of all caught up too. That way, everybody at the next meeting is kind of all on the same page and comes with a set of things that we can kind of, you guys can move forward with, and we can make some pointed recommendations to the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you. Okay, well, that leaves us with the last bit tonight. Any staff comments?
No staff comments.
Okay, thank you. Then board comments? No board comments? Then I make a motion that we adjourn.
Second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. This is going to be interesting reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.